everyone, and welcome to our live stream Rapid Response, How to Protect and Expand Our Democracy. As people are joining us from around the country, let's get to know one another. My name is Olga Nunes. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'll be your host this evening. Please share in the chat your first name, pronouns, and where you're viewing this series from. We'd love to get to know you. We're so grateful that you've joined us, whether it's supporting a candidate, fighting to pass progressive legislation, or working to change this world into one where all can thrive. MoveOn members are committed to an inclusive and progressive future. So welcome to you, whether you're already part of the MoveOn community or whether this is your first time with us. We are so glad that you're here with us tonight. We have a great program planned for today, including MoveOn's Executive Director, Rahna Epting, Senator-elect Reverend Raphael Warnock, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, Nalini Stamp from Working Families Party, Eric K. Ward, civil strategist and civil rights strategist, and Michael Edison Hayden from the Southern Poverty Law Center and Hatewatch. We're here today to talk about how to protect and expand our democracy in the wake of the deadly Trump-backed white supremacist attack on the Capitol. And not only that, but to pause and take a moment to celebrate all the wins that we've made in the last elections and last few months. To get us started today, I'd like to introduce Rahna Epting, Executive Director of MoveOn. Rahna, take it away.
Thank you, Olga, and good evening, everyone. It is an honor to be with all of you here tonight virtually. I wish we could gather in person, but to join in community is an exercise of our collective power, to be with one another, to remind ourselves that we are not alone, that together we are strong, especially during this tumultuous and historic time in our country. This is a thing of beauty. So I'm very grateful you're spending some time with us this evening. And I'll be honest, we are in a moment of tremendous turmoil, tremendous hurt. A virus is still raging across this country. Thousands of people every day, particularly folks in Black and Brown communities, are struggling through this virus. And our government, under the current presidential administration, has given up even attempting to fight it. Economic hardship is all around, and the last bill passed by Congress, let's be clear, it was barely a Band-Aid over a gaping economic wound. And of course, as we gather, we do so less than 2 weeks after a deadly insurrection attacked the heart of our democracy, fueled by lies, racism, and hatred, and incited by the President of the United States. That January 6th attack was a historic day in this country. Never before has a president incited a deadly riot against our own government. Never before have white nationalists stormed the halls of Congress looking to harm our elected leaders. It was a very dark day. But as we sit here tonight and we still process the hurt, I'm also struck by another emotion. Hope. I am reminded that the man we honor tonight, today, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., famously called on all of us to never lose infinite hope. And it is with that hope, that infinite hope in mind, that I remind you all that we are not only coming together tonight in the aftermath of a historic event, but also at the dawn of another one. Not one of hurt, but one of hope. In about 40 hours, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be sworn in. In 40 hours, the Donald Trump presidency will end. On the steps of a building built in part by slave labor, we will swear in our first ever Black and Indian vice president, our first ever female vice president, our first ever Indian vice president. We will break one of the highest and thickest glass ceilings, and we will show our daughters that they can grow up to be anything they want. And it will be historic, and it will be hopeful. And let's say it again, because after all of our collective hard work over the last 4 years, we are now talking about hours, not days, from Donald Trump no longer being president. And not just Trump, in hours. Pence is gone, Ivanka is gone, Jared is gone, Pompeo, Stephen Miller, you name it, all of them, they're out. And why? Because you, because us, because we put in the work. We phone banked, we wrote postcards, we sent text messages, we volunteered, we donated, we talked to our friends and family, we got involved. In one of our nation's darkest hours, there is still hope. The infinite hope that Dr. King spoke of, because we did the work to elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And the good news doesn't end there. Because we all fought through our exhaustion and we never gave up when this election went into overtime, we not only have Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in the White House, we have a Democratic majority in the Senate too, because of you, because of us, because of everything that we did, and because of the folks that are joining me on this call tonight. I know they worked their hearts out. And so what that means, by the end of this week, when Senators-elect Ossoff and Warnock join us in the Senate, and we have Senator Warnock on with us tonight, which we're so thrilled to honor that he is joining us tonight. But when they're sworn in, Lindsey Graham will no longer be chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Marco Rubio will no longer be chairman of the Intelligence Committee. Ron Johnson, you get it. You get the point. These guys are no longer in leadership. And yes, most importantly, Mitch McConnell will no longer be the Senate Majority Leader. And in 2018, MoveOn members and hundreds of thousands and millions of folks worked tirelessly to flip the House of Representatives. And without that work, we would have never been able to hold Trump accountable for his actions. We would have never been able to impeach him twice. And in 2020, we finished the job. We flipped the Senate. And thanks to MoveOn members in Georgia and those all around the country who pitched in to win, we did it because of the work we did together. Because of the work we did together, Joe Biden now has a Congress he can work with to pass democracy reforms, from voting rights to money in politics to DC statehood, and repair the damage of the Trump years to build a better democracy that actually works for all of us, not just the wealthy, well-connected, not just rich white male property owners, but for all of us. And because of the work you did, Joe Biden now has a Congress he can work with to address the climate crisis and invest in green new jobs. He has a Congress he can work with to tackle systemic racism and work to ensure that Black lives really do matter. And it's because of us, because of the work we'll do, we will push Congress to make true on the mandate that got them elected. There is still so much work to do in this country to root out the forces of hate and evil and bring needed reform to our democracy. That was true before the deadly insurrection on the Capitol, and it is even more true now. But on this Martin Luther King Day, I am filled with infinite hope because of the work all of you did, that we did together, and to ensure on January 20th, 40 short hours from now, a new day begins. So thank you. And let's talk about how we protect and expand our democracy, because so much is at stake, from accountability, holding those folks accountable that violated their loyalty to this country and their loyalty to one another, and to expanding democracy reform so this country works for all of us. So thank you. I'll hand it back over to Olga.
Pardon. Sorry, I was muted. I was gushing over Rahna, and thank you so much for grounding us so much in optimism and reminding us that we have so much to celebrate. And for our next guest, I am so excited to introduce Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota's 5th Congressional District. Representative Omar is a proudly progressive member of Congress. Her strong leadership made her among the first endorsements MoveOn members made in the 2020 election cycle. The clarity of purpose and public service she always brings to representing her constituents was on display on January 6th, when she was among the first members of Congress to publicly call for Donald Trump to be impeached for his incitement of violence. We later learned from news reports that Representative Omar wasted no time in moving to action, drafting impeachment articles even while sheltering from the violent mob attacking her and other lawmakers. Welcome, Congressman. We are so happy to have you here with us tonight.
Thank you, Olga. So excited to be here with you all.
We've reached a complex crossroads in history where we should be celebrating, like Rahna said, the new incoming administration, the majority in the House and Senate, flipping Georgia blue in a historic race, and so much more. But because of the actions of a destructive minority and its enablers, our celebrations are bittersweet and marred by the violence of January 6th and the current ongoing threats of violence across the country. Can you talk about how we should be meeting this moment right now?
Well, thank you so much for that question, and it's one that I have continued to think about. I think to Rahna's point, it is important as we think about being hopeful for what is to come, because we are able to count the hours until we are able to put this Trump's presidency in the dustbin of history. But it is really important also for us to think about what accountability should look like for those who have incited this violent and deadly insurrection, who have been part of the failed attempted coup, who have in word and deed helped lead a rebellion against our government, against the seat of democracy, against those who have taken an oath to protect our republic from foreign and domestic enemies. And there are a lot of people who will talk about what it means for us to move on, to think about healing, to think about coming together, to speak about unity, to sort of speed up this process of moving from this dark moment in our nation's history that we all find ourselves in. And then there are those on the other side, those of us who have felt the anger, the frustration, the trauma, and the terror of that day and of the last 4 years, who are calling really for reckoning to take place. And I think it is important for us to think about what our response should be, because how we respond in this moment is critical. We are all terrorized by what happened. I feel terrorized by what happened, but our answer cannot be a broader security structure or a deeper police state. We cannot make policies guided by terror. We do not abide by those principles that are not part of our values and our principles. We cannot really, say that we didn't do everything possible to create tools that will at some point be turned on the most vulnerable and the most marginalized in our communities, that will further terrorize them. And so I know that if we are to look at what it means for us to bring people to account, what it means for us to engage in a restorative process, what it means for us to think about reconciliation. It all comes to two things. It has to include truth, and it has to be rooted in justice. And so, as someone who has survived a civil war, someone who has risen from the ashes of destruction, I know that when people are going through the kind of pain and moments of darkness like we are at the moment, it is easy to want to hasten that process, to allow for people to, as my grandfather used to say, change their shirts, to come back and, and to think of themselves as part of, the new systems that we are creating, without there being an accountability. And I think about people like Lindsey Graham, I think about Ted Cruz, and I think about Josh Hawley, and I think about some of my colleagues in the House, like Minority Leader McCarthy, or Matt Gaetz, or others, who have fueled this fire for so long, who have called white supremacists heroes and friends and allies, who have spoken in rallies where the unifying theme was hate and anger and rage towards people who have stood up to be part of our political discourse, and to serve our country. And today, we cannot allow for those people, without speaking to the big lie that they have utilized to whip people into frenzy, to now just right, say let bygones be bygones, appeal to people's better angels, and and continue to be part of a system of governance, which in our case is our democracy, to not be held to account. And part of that accountability is making sure that they speak the truth to the big lie that they have weaponized. And that is to say that this election, although there are Black and brown people who have shown up in big numbers, was not stolen. And the president that we will swear in on the 20th has a legitimate right to be sworn in. And that our country has, for a long time, had systems that have held these people behind in their ability to fully participate in our democracy. And that an uprising that is to speak of oppression and police brutality cannot be held to the same level and the same weight as a riot, an attempted coup, an insurrection, a rebellion, and against our democracy. And if we are to collectively move forward, we can't both side everything. And if we are to collectively move forward traitors cannot be held as patriots. And if we are to collectively move forward, cowards and people who are inciting violence against those of us who have held to our oath of office are not enemies. And once we can establish that, then the process can begin for us to move collectively as a nation.
Thank you for that. All of that really rings true. And you talked a lot about accountability and how some of your colleagues are friends and allies with white supremacists. I think there are a lot of people who think that once Trump is out of office, these problems go away. Can you talk a little bit about what comes next after he's out of office? Why do you think it's important that the Senate should convict Trump?
It is very important because of two things, actually, for me. I know that everybody has, a list of reasons on why they think this is an important endeavor for us to engage in. One, I think, we didn't arrive here by accident. Trump is not a mistake. Our democracy and its vulnerability were being exploited and have been exploited by someone who I have considered a tyrant since the first day he was sworn into office. And if this tyrant is not held accountable, and if we allow for a president who has led a rebellion, who has failed in his attempted coup, who has incited an insurrection, to not be held accountable because, one, there were only a few days left because of the election, and two, because they're no longer in office, then we risk, right, history repeating itself. And that is a dangerous step for us to take. And secondly, I think there is a message, not just to our nation, but to the world, that we have to send about our democracy and what it stands for. We talk about ourselves as being a nation of laws, as being a nation where your actions have consequences, and where nobody is above the law. And so if we do not follow through with that, right, if we do not see our values and principles carried out in this moment where it's most needed, then it makes the principles and the values that we have spoken of for so long meaningless, not just to the people of our country, but to the rest of the world. And I think for those two reasons, he does need to get convicted no matter what in the Senate. And I think it is really important for us not to think about the politics of it, not to think about the time and the resources that it will take, because it is essentially one of the most important things that we can do as lawmakers.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman, and thank you so much for spending time with us today. Are there any last words you'd like to share that you think we should keep in mind, us and our viewers, in the coming few days?
Well, like I said earlier, I mean, I think, you know, we have found out that our democracy is as fragile as, you know, any other democracy has been. And, you know, there are no saviors. There is no magic wand. And it is going to take all of us to fix the mess that has been created the last 4 years. But it is going to also be really important for us to not just get stuck in that mess, but to holistically look at the brokenness of the systems that have brought us to this moment, the fragileness of not just our democracy, but of our society, the backsliding that we have seen, the vulnerabilities that we are all living through, the trauma that many of us are experiencing, all were in the making for so long. And if we do not take the time to fully examine and investigate, we will find ourselves in this position, if not in 4 years, but certainly in 10 years and in 20 years.
That's right. That's right. Thank you again so much for joining us, Congresswoman. It's always a pleasure. And thank you for all the work you're doing on our behalf.
Thank you for having me.
If you're just joining us in the audience, in the chat, stay tuned for more special guests, including Senator-elect Reverend Raphael Warnock, coming up soon in our program. And you know, if you're still here, send a shout out in the chat and say hi, and let us know that you're still here. Coming up now is our next guest, Nalini Stamp from Working Families Party. Nalini Stamp is a progressive activist, grassroots organizer, and leading national voice on racial and economic justice. For over a decade, Nalini has worked to build a multiracial, economically just society through progressive electoral campaigns nationwide and abroad. Welcome, Nalini.
Thank you for having me, Olga. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. In light of the fact that we're now facing a new incoming administration with a Democratic majority in both the House and Senate, and we've broken the glass ceiling for Black women, women of color, and women in general with Kamala Harris becoming vice presidents, can you share a little bit about how you're seeing this moment?
Yeah, it is amazing that we have seen so many historic things happen. The fact that we have a female, our first female vice president, the fact that the state of Georgia is getting its first Black senator in the history of this nation. Deb Haaland becoming the first Indigenous appointee. This is amazing progress for us, and this is where we need to go, because we need to repair for so many things: genocide, slavery, years of incarcerating people, and we need to do that by first there's representation. And it's amazing to see that we have done that. In the last year, though, we also have to repair for harms that were seen because of years of disinvestment in our education, in jobs, in infrastructure, in healthcare, and we noticed that all during this pandemic. Our hospitals are overrun. We have almost 400,000 people who have died, including my own family members. We have millions of people who are going on unemployment, and specifically this last round of unemployment, majority of them were women who filed for unemployment. And so both we need to hold every member of Congress accountable for the rhetoric that they spilled that got us to what happened on the 6th, but we also need to give the people what they need, which is jobs. We need 16 million jobs for everyone, and we're supporting and looking forward to pushing for the Thrive agenda. We need to make sure that housing is a human right and strengthen the eviction moratorium, because it cannot be the same moratorium that this past administration had. We need to make sure that we get healthcare for everyone who needs it and invest in our public schools. We obviously need to make sure that we have climate resiliency for the future. And for us to hopefully not get in this mess again, we need to pass HR 1. We need to make sure that democracy is front and center, get rid of corporations within our electoral system, and change the rules so that more working class people can run for office, so that our actual democracy works to what it was said to be. And so that's what I'm looking forward to, right? I'm looking forward to both having these breakthrough moments and having people who look like me in office, more of them at the highest levels, people who are working in the administration. And it's amazing to see the diversity there. And this is something that my family always taught me, but all my skin folk ain't kinfolk, which means I really need to see the issues being put front and center. And thus far, as we've seen Biden's COVID relief bill, the first one, I like what I'm seeing. It definitely needs to be strengthened. There definitely needs to be, I really, really, really think that we need we need rent debt relief for every renter in this country. But if that is the floor that this new administration is coming in, I can't wait to see the ceiling. And if not, organizations like the Working Families Party, I know organizations like MoveOn will hold their feet to the fire every step of the way and get what the people deserve. And I think the last thing that I will say is that I really don't want this to be a repeat. And I know it sounds kind of hard, but one of the things that sometimes in recent history, what Democrats do when they're in control of all three houses, federally, when they're in control of both Congress and the White House, sometimes they push for austerity so that we can solve our issues and our problems. But actually, we need to transform. We need that big structural change that is not just going to Band-Aid solution us by cutting services and essential things that we need. We actually need to go big. We need jobs, we need healthcare, and we need care for our communities. So that's what the Working Families will be pushing with our People's Charter. And we're going to be pushing a jobs and care narrative because the people deserve that.
Bravo. I want to give you a standing ovation because that made me feel super optimistic. I was going to ask you, how do you retain optimism in these times? But you are just like a ball of optimism. So that totally worked. I was going to ask it to your point of trying to, keep our representatives sort of on track. Like, how would you recommend people watching hold the people representing them, like their feet to the fire to make sure we get what we need?
Absolutely. Well, I think that, there's still even though we're still in COVID, and I am not recommending lots of people go outside. And if you do, there's car caravans. It's a great tactic now. But I think that, it just like we have been doing, just because we have a new administration, maybe our vitrion's different, maybe our steps to escalating is different, but you made those calls. All of the people who are watching made all of those calls throughout these last 4 years of the Trump administration. So it's the same thing. Make calls, contact your members of Congress, and push for things. And people should look for the organizations that they support or they're members of, like MoveOn, like Working Families Party, like many of them out there that have a roadmap for this administration and have tools. So, we have, and MoveOn is one of the signatories of our People's Charter, and we're going to be going after every single point. And we're going to do it by making sure our base is calling members of Congress. We're going to do it by fun, creative actions, because I do think that we need a little fun. As much as these are dark times, we need a little fun to continue to keep us motivated. And we're going to do it by telling our stories. I think it was really, really tough to tell a lot of stories because every single day in the Trump administration felt like 16 years. And so it was just kind of hard where all cylinders were going on all of our communities. Now, that's not going to change. We're still in a pandemic that has highlighted economic, racial inequities in our country, right? That doesn't mean it changes. But I do think we as communities need to be telling our stories. We did that with Occupy Wall Street. We said we are the 99%. So let's actually start to tell our stories and demand that this new administration actually meet our needs.
Thank you. That is a rallying cry that I hope everyone hears. And I guess like my last question is, the optimism that you are filling the virtual room with is so refreshing. And I know that like it's really easy for, like you said, it's dark days for them to encroach like back on our hearts. What would you tell people who are looking for ways to hold on to the optimism that you are radiating right now?
Thanks. I don't feel like I'm radiating optimism, but that's awesome. Thank you very much for seeing that. Here's the thing. I think we have to just recognize that it's going to be both, right? It is going one day. I really remember this when in the beginning of the lockdown and in quarantine, two of my family members had COVID and I had COVID and two of them died within the same week. An aunt and an uncle. And I remember I didn't know what to do. It's not like we could go to funerals. It wasn't like there was a place to cry out. And I expressed it by just like recording a video about my story and putting it on the internet because I was like, you know what? Let me get it out. And I know that it's dark times. There are folks who are struggling with, everything from addictions to abuse in the households, or just the fact that we are in a pandemic and there are a lot of people like myself who are just extroverts and need people around. But I think it is really important to express it in some way. And so what I do is I express it through joy and music, and that making sure that those folks and what is happening is not going to take that away from me. So whatever it is, if you bake, if it's actual protest and you want to continue doing car caravans, I'll join you. If it is reading, if it is, honestly, if it's watching TV too, I got a lot of good recommendations. Whatever it is that you can express your joy, it doesn't have to be a lot, but a little bit each day actually gets us through. And the thing that I am really excited about is that we won something that folks didn't really think that we would win. We turned over the presidency and won the Senate in the same year with a runoff, which nobody thought could be done. So for me, I just believe that we are the answer to our future, and that I have hope in all of the people out there who have organized over not just the last 4 years, but the last couple of decades, and that we're going to make sure that we can actually have a new political realignment.
Thank you so much for that reminder that joy is an act of rebellion, which I wholeheartedly endorse. And to remind, folks watching that, not just that we are here for the fight, but, to invest in what's worth fighting for, to like remind ourselves what's worth fighting for. So thank you. Thank you so much, Nalini, for joining us. Yeah, you're always welcome. Thank you again. If you're just tuning in now, stick around. We've got a bunch more special guests coming, including Senator-elect Reverend Raphael Warnock, as well as Michael Edison Hayden. But for right now, I'd actually like to share the CTA. We've got a call to action for those watching. Right now, if you grab your phone, you take it out, super easy. You can text EXPEL, E-X-P-E-L, to 668-366 to demand the removals of seditious members of Congress. Like Congressman Omar was speaking about, like Rahna was speaking about. It's really important right now that we invest in pressuring our representatives to hold them to account. It's not just important that we hold Trump accountable, but that we hold every member of Congress accountable that enabled the violent attack on January 6th. Thank you again for joining us. And if you're just tuning in, stick around till the end of our program for some more special guests, including Senator-elect Reverend Raphael Warnock, as well as Michael Edison Hayden from the Southern Poverty Law Center. But for now, I'd like to introduce civil rights strategist Eric K. Ward. He's a senior fellow at the Southern Poverty Law Center, and for over 30 years, he's attended white nationalist and other anti-authoritarian meetings conducting research, and has worked in progressive organizations at the national and local levels in order to help communities respond to social movements that promote bigotry off of race, religion, gender, and sexual orientation. Thank you for joining us, Eric. Based on what you've seen in the world and your research, can you describe a little bit about what happened on January 6th and who you think the people were behind it?
Yes. On Wednesday, January 6th, we saw an attempted coup take place in Washington, D.C. It was made up of a number of tendencies that are known as the alt-right. The alt-right is an authoritarian, anti-democratic, small d, political coalition that is made up of a coalition of groups: white nationalists who largely drive that alt-right coalition, Second Amendment activists, private homeschoolers, the theocratic right, and a host of other elements, including paramilitary organizations, some armed, many unarmed, like the Proud Boys, who present themselves as, in their own words, Western chauvinists, but in fact have a long history and association with white nationalists and other hardcore racists. Many of these tendencies gathered together with the support of Donald Trump and other elected officials under the auspices of stopping the vote count in a joint session of Congress, which has happened traditionally for quite some time. They were able to breach the Capitol building, and it appears through some support, perhaps from civil servants and others, and put elected officials at risk. And actually, the breach resulted in the death of several individuals, including a law enforcement officer who was purposely crushed in the door and had his head smashed in with a fire extinguisher. We saw a number of attempts to attack lawmakers by breaching into their spaces. We've learned that there were attempts to hold those lawmakers hostage or at least injure them. This is what we saw on January 6th. We should be clear that while these different groupings within this alt-right coalition may have ultimately different goals, they were united in their attempt to overthrow American democracy. They were not there to oppose a policy. They were there to oppose how the United States government functions and governs. It was a direct attempt to usurp the will of the American people.
Thank you so much for contextualizing that. To the people who are watching along at home, what can they do to address this, to respond to this?
First, I want to say that I understand the fear and the anxiety. I'm not asking you to let go of that fear and anxiety. I'm asking you to do something despite the fear and anxiety. The thing that I'm asking you to do is to call every elected official that represents you and to ask that elected official to be very clear with you and the public around where they stand in this moment. I don't care if that's a local school board member or the president of the United States. Make that call, make that email. Let your voice be heard. The second is to understand you are not alone. You are actually the majority of America that believes in equity, that believes in accountable government. I need you to understand that you are the majority, and it is time for the majority to come together. That means being active in your house of worship, or within your labor union, or within your association, whether that's a sports event, whether that's art, or whether it's a real estate association. Become active in it and bring this issue into the discussion and decide as a group what you can do. The third is this: we need policies that meet the moment that we are now in. We need a fairness doctrine in the United States. Conspiracies have been allowed to fester on social media, right, and on national television because we have no laws or regulations that force news agencies to provide accurate, fair, and balanced perspectives. It's time for a fairness doctrine that does just that. We also need to begin to spend time understanding how we begin to move forward together as a country. And that means spending time talking about our values more than our ideologies. We will not find alignment amongst ideological differences, but we can find unity among common values. Common values allow us to understand the problems that we see as a country and to build the solutions to tackle them. Believe in your higher self. This is your chance to be human. Stand up, make it count. Be afraid, but move forward anyway. That's what it means to be a citizen of the United States. That's what it means to be a resident of this country, that we stand for each other and for our neighbors, no matter how ominous it may look. There are brighter days ahead. Believe it. Do not believe white nationalists. Do not believe Donald Trump. He is a liar. But what you see happening each day in the world, his neighbors work with one another, his healthcare workers put themselves at risk, that is the sign of the dedication and the willingness of Americans to build with one another. We all need to become barn builders in America today. And that means helping our neighbors, not scaring them.
That's a great way of putting it. One of the things that strikes me about the way you talk about this is how there's sort of this hopeful underpinning in your perspective. Can you talk a little bit about what brings you hope?
What brings me hope? Stacey Abrams and Latasha Brown of Georgia and the hard work that they did on the ground to make sure all votes mattered brought me immense hope in this moment. Learning that President-elect Joe Biden decided to run for the presidency of the United States because of the anti-Semitic and racist events in Charlottesville brings me hope. Watching brave Republican leaders stand up and denounce the insurrection, distancing themselves, trying to hold Donald Trump accountable brings me hope. But what really brings me hope are like the millions of people that I hear of each and every day who are bringing meals to their neighbors, right? Who are leaving envelopes with dollars to their family and friends who are out of work, who leave flowers on the doorsteps of seniors who have been isolated for months. It's those everyday acts of millions of Americans who are made up of immigrants, Muslims, Christians, Black, white, Native, women, trans, gay, straight, who are just choosing to do one thing to let other folks know that they matter and care. I see these examples each and every day. And I hope those who are listening right now will ensure that those examples grow exponentially. It is our love for each other that will see us through. It is our hope for the future that will see us through. And that hope grows in the choice to do one thing. And that one thing is to show kindness and to show what's at the heart of the United States of America. The idea that we will stand together, even in the hardest moments.
Thank you, Eric K. Ward, for your inspirational and grounding words. And thank you again for joining us. You're always welcome.
Thank you so much, Olga.
Thank you, Eric, for your inspirational and grounding words. We're so grateful to have you, and you're welcome back anytime. If you're just joining us, please stick around. We've got one last guest at the end of our program, Senator-elect Reverend Raphael Warnock, who will be on our program in a moment. For now, we'd like to introduce Jordan Yule, who we're inviting on to interview our next guest, Michael Edison Hayden, Senior Investigative Reporter and Spokesperson with Southern Poverty Law Center.
Thank you, Olga. And how great of a job has Olga done tonight? See a lot of people in the chat. Thank you all for joining us. If you have questions, please drop them in there. I see a lot of familiar faces over on Twitch. I've been watching these streams that MoveOn has put out throughout the election, and you all are showing up every single time. So we really, really appreciate the Twitch chat. So again, if you have questions, please drop them in there. But like Olga said, Michael Hayden, senior investigative reporter from the Southern Poverty Law Center, is joining me. Michael, thank you. How are you?
I'm well, man. How are you? I haven't seen you since we were at a bar pre-pandemic.
Yeah, better times, certainly. But I mean, looking ahead, I mean, we've got a bright spot on the horizon just in about 48 hours. But as optimistic as we are about Trump leaving office, there's still problems that loom, right? I mean, we've talked earlier in this program about how extremism and right-wing fringe groups have bubbled up and ultimately attacked the Capitol on January 6th. And that energy isn't going anywhere. You are somebody who, at SPLC's Hatewatch, you've tracked this over the years. Could you help us draw kind of a through line? How did we get to this point? And specifically with the Republican Party, I mean, this isn't just some, a few bad apples in the party. I mean, this is kind of like an overall tacit approval by the party apparatus. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, SPLC really took a lot of heat from the right over the last 4 years. And, that's part because we drew explicit connections between, white supremacist movement and the Republican Party, which a lot of people, I think, were afraid to do, in large part because of the degree to which, it's difficult to say. We're used to saying, okay, both sides and this and that and the other thing. But since Trump first announced his run in 2015, we have seen a huge increase in the degree to which, white supremacists are willing to come out of the shadows, put themselves, face first online, put their face in front of cameras and start talking about what they believe. And it's largely because they've been sort of encouraged by Trump's really horrific anti-immigrant rhetoric. I mean, you saw that obviously in Charlottesville, where you have people chanting "Jews will not replace us" and holding torches in defense of a Confederate monument. And then, and then on January 6th, we see people who are wearing T-shirts advertising a civil war, where they go storming the Capitol buildings. Like, how do we get to a place in which people are wearing T-shirts like the kind of terrible T-shirts you'd see in a mall advertising a civil war, or that horrific Camp Auschwitz thing? And I think that it does not take a political scientist to figure out that the Trump movement, which has taken over the Republican Party, has made it much more comfortable for white supremacists and far-right extremists to come out and express their views in public.
So, yeah, it's certainly naive to think that all of this began with Trump. It's ahistorical. I mean, it doesn't, reflect properly on our history. We need to remember that these sentiments existed long before Trump. He brought these people out of the woodwork. He emboldened them. He made it. He created an environment where it's safe for them to, like you say, espouse their views publicly. And they had the tacit approval of the Republican Party. So what challenges do you see ahead? What should people understand as we continue to fight white supremacy, white nationalism in this country? How can people better equip themselves?
Well, I mean, a lot has been made about the degree to which having a two-party system really, has strangled America. And I don't think you could possibly have a better example of that than when you have one political party that is now completely corroded with this totally anti-democratic worldview. And it is getting louder. It's not getting more quiet, which poses like a real threat. I mean, you have like progressives and leftists who don't want to vote and things like that. And I'll listen to everybody. But the reality is that you have this one political party now where, I mean, you have figures like Jack Posobiec, who, I've written about a lot, who, has been connected to so many Trump world figures who were meeting with Polish neo-fascists and marching in a march on Poland that featured neo-Nazi groups, right? You have Stephen Miller, who was among the most powerful people of the Trump era, connected to VDARE, which is a white nationalist group. You have dark money, as Alex Koch reported, dark money flowing into VDARE to the degree to which that they can afford a $1.4 million historic castle in West Virginia that is a train ride away from DC. Yeah, it's insane. And they purchased it, without a mortgage. I mean, I don't know about you, but it's very difficult for me to purchase property without a mortgage. So this is really scary. There's dark money flowing in. I mean, there are far-right extremists appearing on like Learjets and stuff like that to go to protests, and that same Republican infrastructure that existed to to prop up these these kind of like Bush era Republican things are now propping up people who want to eliminate democracy altogether and have, in some cases, extraordinarily hateful views about non-white people. And that is really scary, and it's something that impacts basically all of us.
You mentioned a few different figures in there, and they all seem to have ties to various media outlets, whether it's establishing itself as some sort of news operation or think tanks with frequent publications like blogs, but ultimately it's about getting their narratives out into the world through telecommunications. I want to ask you a question from the chat. So we've got Meredith that's me asks, how do we instill trust or develop better news resources to get factual information to the public efficiently? I mean, they think Meredith recognizes a problem. They're using the same tools that most people rely on just to get, the weather, the headlines, to spread hate, to spread white nationalism, to spread white supremacy. So what efforts are underway? What do you recognize about these trends? Is there anything you want to add and speak to Meredith's question?
Yeah, I mean, I wish there was an easy answer to Meredith's question. Unfortunately, there isn't. I mean, we have, websites like Gateway Pundit. I mean, check out the traffic on Gateway Pundit sometime, and your heart will stop. Yeah. And this is a website that ran the like Antifa super soldiers are going to behead white parents and whatever. Remember this?
Yeah.
In 2017, and they're getting massive traffic, and you have President Trump. Brought them closer to the White House and gave them, added access. You have people like Cassandra Fairbanks, who's connected to a network of far-right extremists who works for that publication. That's just like one of so many garbage publications that have absolutely no standards, degraded, publications. One American News is on cable TV. So I don't know exactly how you fix that, but I do think it is imperative. Part of the problem with the nature of my job is to point out problems and not always solutions. I mean, some part of my law center definitely does do that. But I mean, I think it's imperative that, politicians begin talking about this, about this issue to a louder degree, because it's existential. The problem is existential in the sense that, you want to talk selfishly, their jobs are not going to exist anymore. And we're not going to be able to do streams like this if anti-democratic actors get their way. So I'm not sure exactly how you fix it is the answer, but it needs to be a much bigger discussion yesterday.
Right. If you're just joining us, Michael Hayden with SPLC's Hatewatch, the senior investigative reporter there. We're taking your questions in the chat. If you have any, we understand there's buffering problems on Twitch. We're also on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook as well. But we thank you for joining us. I mean, that's to Michael's question. That's one step. You are here. You're educating yourself. You're getting familiar with the issue, and you're addressing it on a intimate level. So, thank you for joining us. That's like the first step to combating white supremacy and white nationalism. Michael, what are you most concerned about? Like we said, it's not going away. These sentiments are going to continue. They're going to continue to fester. Who do you see really tapping into this? I mean, we've heard mentions of Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, who helped foment this violence. Who are you really worried about going forward?
Well, I mean, I think that what we saw in the immediate aftermath of Trump losing that election was a collection of forces that should not necessarily be hanging out together. If you remember historically, who now are, and that is the biggest concern for me, in the sense that there used to be these very soft barriers that existed that sort of kept certain elements of far-right extremism at bay from the Republican Party. And, over time, from 2015 onto up until this attack on January 6th, those barriers have been eroded little by little over time between those far-right extremists and sort of your bread and butter GOP guy who might show up at any rally, right? And then those barriers eroded altogether when you had white nationalists connected to Nick Fuentes' America First movement, mixing it up with people who look like grandmothers and people wearing sort of those kind of kitschy Tea Party-like T-shirts that advertise something stupid on them. It's just the kind of that mix of that sort of stupid, kitschy, idiotic look of some of these kind of conservative, patriotism like gear mixed in with these harder edged white nationalist materials. And I think that they understand right now that their margin is very thin, because if you recall, around like 2014 or so, the Republican Party was really pushing forward like a much more diverse look, right? There was like Bobby Jindal, Nikki Haley, Rubio's Cuban, and Ted Cruz is actually part of that as well. We're just sort of like trying, during the after Obama had won re-election, to try to sort of, plan for the future, try to get this what Rubio called like a multiracial working class, right? They're certainly trying to appeal to that possibility. And Trump, because he was not connected to the party elites, at least at that time, he didn't play by those rules. He didn't care. People like Ann Coulter were overjoyed, right? Because Coulter herself is connected to white nationalists at VDR and so forth. But Trump did the thing that was the short-term reward. It's right. It was like, there's a dinner coming for your kids, and there's a little protein, and there's some greens, and here's this, and that's what you're going to eat for dinner, and that's what the elites had sort of planned for the Republican Party, right? And then Trump is like, "What about this Snickers bar?" Right? And he just goes to this white identity stuff that appeals to this really thin margin that could get it, they could barely win an election, and that the elites knew had very limited appeal. And so he's like, "How about the Snickers bar?" And everybody's like, "Hell yeah, Snickers bar." He starts doing the the build the wall chants and things like that. And Trump, he's a performer, and when people start chanting this stuff and doing this, it just pushes him further and further, and he just starts to push it further himself as a carnival barker in that style. So he went against the party elite and sort of pushed this white identity stuff, and now they are stuck, I think, with this very thin margin that they have to win elections due to this doubling down on this thing that they knew was trouble because of the changing demographics in this country. And because of that, I'm afraid that it's going to accelerate the desire to limit democracy as much as possible because of how thin this margin he created for them is, right? You know what I mean? Like if you're just going for this very thin populist white identity base, and you're pushing for that, your margin between that and winning elections is so thin that you are going to do everything possible to try to disenfranchise votes, try to pull those away. And I think it's pulling a lot of GOP faithful closer towards wanting explicit fascism.
Yeah, to your point, the contrast couldn't have been more clear. So on January 6th, we had guys, like you said earlier, with Camp Auschwitz hoodies, and we have open white nationalists. I mean, the guy who was famously in that photo who kicked his feet up on Speaker Pelosi's desk, told the media he was a white nationalist. In that same crowd, you've got white suburban realtors and people flying in on private jets, and a woman addressing the crowd in a Louis Vuitton sweater. And I think it speaks to just how intertwined these two sects of the Republican Party are now. You've got this hard right, and you've got this white suburban pity me mindset that has just coalesced into this amorphous blob of hatred. It's certainly something we have to be mindful of, and we cannot ignore, and we cannot assume that it's going to go away after Trump. I mean, I wish we can go on all night because you're a wealth of information. But is there anything else you would like to tell the viewers?
I think one thing that's really, really important for the viewers to understand, just one parting thought, is something I mentioned to our mutual friend Jared Holt the other day, which is we have people in this country who need insulin, right? We have people in this country who need food desperately, right? We need people in this country who need healthcare. And these were not the grievances that caused this group to storm the Capitol, right? I mean, they're not people like, doing violence because they want to feed their family. Their grievance is that they want more and more power. They want Trump in power. And I think many of them, despite what everybody keeps talking about, the big lie, I think many of them know. I think they know that Trump lost, and I don't think they care. And that is what we should be most concerned about. And that's what would really strengthen your resolve in standing up to this stuff. Because look, all the people who downplay the possibility of right-wing authoritarianism and fascism in this country, throw that stuff out the window and really look at the grievances. There were no grievances other than the fact they wanted Trump to be president. That's terrifying, and the next person who comes along and wants to exploit that group, if they're successful, we could be in a lot of trouble. So just strengthen your resolve and learn to build relationships with one another. I think everyone who disagrees with the values that were lack thereof that were expressed during the Trump era needs to find ways to work together to make sure that this just does not happen again.
Michael Hayden, Southern Poverty Law Center's Hatewatch, a senior investigative reporter. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I'm going to hand it back over to my colleague, Olga.
I'm on mute again. Why, hello, friends. So I'm still here. If you're still here and you're in the chat, give us a shout and let us know that you're still here. We're so grateful that you're spending your evening with us during, as Rahna said earlier, the last 40 some hours left before Trump is out of office. And thank you for sticking around with us to the end of our program. If you have a phone handy, if you're on your phone, we have a call to action. Just text expel to 668-366 to demand the removal of seditious members of Congress. EXPEL 668-366. And I am super honored and grateful to introduce, finally, our last speaker, Reverend Raphael Warnock, Senator-elect Raphael Warnock from the great state of Georgia. MoveOn members poured their hearts and souls into your campaign. Over 55,000 Georgia MoveOn members volunteered to help elect Reverend Warnock and fellow candidate John Ossoff in the November election and then on into the January runoff. We donated, texted voters, knocked on doors, and of course, we voted. And it is particularly special to hear from Reverend Warnock on this night. Today is Martin Luther King Jr. Day, a day we celebrate the birth and life of MLK. So it is noteworthy that since 2005, Reverend Warnock has been pastor of the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, the spiritual home of Dr. King. And tomorrow, Senator-elect Warnock becomes Senator Warnock when he will be sworn into the United States Senate and putting Democrats back in the majority in the Senate. Reverend Warnock, thank you so much for taking the time out of your incredibly busy schedule to speak with MoveOn members tonight.
How grateful and honored I am to join with MoveOn.org as we celebrate the birthday of arguably the greatest American, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We remember his work. We remember his words. He told us that we are tied in a single garment of destiny, caught up in an inescapable network of mutuality. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. We have been reminded of the truth of those words in tragic ways this year, as we've been faced with a pandemic unlike anything we've seen in a century. All of a sudden, we have a deadly airborne disease, and my neighbor coughs. She may be sick, but I am potentially imperiled by my neighbor's cough. We are as close together in our humanity as a cough. We must stand up and fight for one another. I know that that has been the work and the mission of MoveOn.org, and I'm grateful for the ways in which we stood together during this election cycle. We've had historic wins. We're grateful for the election of President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. A historic election, one that promises a transformational agenda for people all across these United States. And so let us continue to fight for access to affordable health care. Let us insist on the dignity of work and the dignity of workers, which means that workers ought to enjoy a livable wage. Too many of them have worked and have not enjoyed the prosperity that they have helped to create for others. Workers make America great. Let's stand up and push hard against bigotry as it shows up in racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, homophobia, xenophobia. We must remind ourselves of the covenant we have with one another as an American people. I believe that this can be one of the most transformational moments in the history of our country, that we can strengthen voting rights, that we can ensure that people have access to affordable health care, that we can build together what Dr. King called the beloved community. I know it's dark, but you know, my dad used to wake me up every morning at dawn. I grew up in public housing, but he poured in me a sense of a work ethic, and he told me to work hard. I was able to get where I am, earn 4 degrees, become the pastor of Ebenezer Church where Dr. King served, now a United States Senator-elect, because I worked hard, but also because somebody gave me some Pell Grants, some low-interest student loans. In other words, I had a path to the American dream. But I remember in this moment, my dad waking me up every morning at dawn. He'd say, "Son, get up, get dressed, put your shoes on, get ready." He taught me to be ready for whatever the day would bring. The thing about waking up at dawn is that it's morning, but it's still dark. It's dark, but the morning is upon us. I know it's been dark for a long time. The last year has been devastating. We have experienced unspeakable loss of lives, loss of livelihoods. One wonders when and how it will ever end. Scripture tells us that weeping endures for the night. Joy comes in the morning. My dad taught me that you can't really control everything that will happen in a day, but it's your job to put on your shoes, stand up, get ready for the work. And so let's roll up our sleeves. Let's stand alongside this new president and new vice president. Let's stand up for the best in the American dream. Let's move the country closer towards our ideals. Dr. King said that the Moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. He knew that that arc does not bend automatically. He said that change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability. In other words, it takes hard work. And so let's keep bending that arc until everyone has access to affordable health care. Keep bending that arc until workers enjoy a livable wage. Keep bending that arc until every child, regardless of their zip code, knows that they too can become a United States Senator. They can become President of the United States of America. Their parents' income does not have to determine their outcome. I'm grateful for this moment. We celebrate Dr. King, but we celebrate him best by doing the work. So get up, get dressed, put shoes on, get ready. Today we celebrate on this mountain. Tomorrow we go down in the valley to continue the work.
Thank you so much for your words of inspiration, Senator-elect Reverend Warnock. We're grateful for you spending some of your time with us today. And we can't wait to introduce you as Senator Reverend Warnock next time we see you. For those of you that missed it earlier, we'd like to remind you that you can grab your phones, pull them out, and you can text EXPEL to 668-366 to demand the removals of seditious members of Congress. So we can hold those accountable who are responsible for the violence January 6th and the ongoing threats of violence. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, for all the work you've done to enable these amazing recent wins, for the work you've done in Georgia, and for the work you've done in your communities. There's a lot of hardship right now, but there's a lot to celebrate too. And because of your hard work, we can start rolling up our sleeves and tackling the problems that we're facing as a nation. Don't forget to follow us on Twitch. And if you're not already a MoveOn member, you can become a member by signing up for our SMS or email lists. And we'll give you a shout when we have another live stream coming up, because we'd love to spend more time with you, hanging out and chatting. Thanks again to our amazing guests, to Senator-elect Warnock, to Congressman Omar, and to all of our special guests. And to all of you watching, thanks again for everything you do. And have a great night.